The stars looked different when they were burning. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defender and watched distant suns flicker like broken lights. 3 years of war had changed everything. The Zephyrian Empire and the Korathan Federation were tearing the galaxy apart, one system at a time. Jake had seen the reports. Billions dead, entire planets cracked open like eggs, cities that had stood for thousands of years turned to glass and ash. It started over mining rights to some rare crystals, but now both sides fought just to keep fighting. They used weapons that could break worlds. The Defender was not a warship. She was an explorer, built to study strange new worlds and map distant stars. Her crew of 200 had signed up to discover things, not to fight wars. Jake had been her captain for 5 years, and in all that time, they had never fired a shot in anger. Chief Engineer Lisa Adams worked at her station, her fingers dancing over the controls. She knew every bolt and wire on the ship. If something broke, she could fix it. If something needed improving, she could make it better. She was the kind of person who saw problems as puzzles waiting to be solved. Dr. Kevin Brooks sat in the medical bay, reading reports on alien biology. He had studied every known species in the galaxy. He understood how their bodies worked, how they thought, how they lived, but understanding something and fixing it were different things. The war had shown him just how fragile life could be. Amy Carter monitored the communication channels from her post. She could speak 12 different alien languages and understood the subtle meanings behind their words. Her grandfather had been a radio operator during Earth's old wars, and he had taught her that sometimes the most important messages were the ones people did not want to send. Humanity was new to space. They had been traveling between stars for barely 100 years. Most alien species had been doing it for thousands. To the great powers of the galaxy, humans were like children playing with toys. They had no real weapons, no powerful allies, no ancient wisdom. They were just there, trying to learn and grow. The Defender was conducting a survey mission in the Helix Nebula when the distress calls started coming in. Amy picked up the signals first. Her equipment detected emergency broadcasts from both Zephyrian and Korathan ships. They were calling for help, but they were also calling for reinforcements. Jake studied the tactical display. The battle was happening near something called the Nexus Gate. It was a massive wormhole that connected 3 major trade routes. Whoever controlled it could move ships and supplies across half the galaxy in days instead of months. It was the kind of place that wars were fought over. Lisa pulled up the sensor readings. Both fleets were huge. The Zephyrians had brought their crystal ships, each one the size of a city and armed with weapons that could tear holes in space itself. The Korathans had their bioships, living creatures grown in laboratories and trained to fight like attack dogs. The Defender could not fight either fleet. Her weapons were designed to clear asteroids and defend against pirates, not to face the most advanced military forces in the galaxy. One shot from a Zephyrian energy cannon could vaporize the entire ship. A single Korathan biotorpedo could eat through her hull like acid. Jake faced an impossible choice. They could turn around and leave. The smart thing to do was to jump to hyperspace and report what they had seen. Let someone else deal with the war. The Defender had no business being near a battle between the galaxy's superpowers, but the distress calls kept coming. Ships were dying out there. People were calling for help and nobody was answering. The 2 fleets were so focused on destroying each other that they ignored everything else. Damaged ships drifted in space, their crews slowly running out of air. Amy translated the emergency signals. Zephyrian voices spoke in their crystal-clear tones about honor and duty. Korathan biominds sent images of pain and desperation. Both sides were suffering, but neither would ask the other for help. Pride was more important than survival. Dr. Brooks looked at the medical reports coming from the battle zone. Thousands of wounded on both sides, burns from energy weapons, poisoning from biotoxins, injuries that would kill if not treated soon. His oath as a doctor said he had to help anyone who needed it, regardless of who they were. Lisa studied the tactical situation. The battle was getting worse by the hour. Both fleets were pouring everything they had into the fight. Energy levels were climbing to dangerous levels. The space around the Nexus Gate was becoming unstable from all the weapons fire. Jake made his decision. He ordered the ship to change course toward the battle zone. His crew looked at him like he had lost his mind. They were flying a science ship into the middle of the biggest space battle in galactic history. It was suicide. As the Defender approached the Nexus Gate, the scale of the destruction became clear. Wreckage drifted everywhere. Broken ships tumbled through space, leaking atmosphere and radiation. The survivors sent desperate signals into the void, hoping someone would hear them. The Zephyrian fleet moved in perfect formation, their crystal hulls reflecting the light of distant stars. Their weapons charged with mathematical precision, each shot calculated to cause maximum damage. They fought like a computer program, cold and efficient. The Corathan ships writhed and twisted like living things. Their bioweapons adapted to each attack, growing stronger and deadlier. They fought like wild animals driven by instinct and rage. Every hit made them more dangerous. The Defender slipped between the two fleets like a mouse between fighting elephants. Her small size and weak energy signature made her almost invisible compared to the massive warships. But Jake knew that would not last long. Soon, someone would notice them and wonder what a human ship was doing in their war. The first person to challenge them was a Zephyrian commander. His message came through crisp and clear, demanding to know their business. Jake tried to explain that they were there to help with rescue operations, but the alien dismissed him with contempt. Humans were primitives who had no place in a real war. The Corathans were no friendlier. Their hive mind sent images of suspicion and hostility. They saw the human ship as a scavenger, come to pick through the wreckage like a vulture. They ordered the Defender to leave immediately or be destroyed. Jake realized they were on their own. Either side wanted their help, but people were still dying out there. The Defender might be small and weak, but she had something the warships did not. She had a crew that cared more about saving lives than winning battles. And sometimes that was enough. The battle started with a flash of light that turned space white for several seconds. The Zephyrian crystal ships fired first, sending beams of pure energy across the void. The light was so bright that the Defender's sensors had to shut down to avoid being damaged. When they came back online, the war had truly begun. The Corathan bioships responded by releasing clouds of living weapons. Millions of tiny creatures that moved like angry bees swarmed toward the enemy fleet. Each one was designed to burrow through ship hulls and attack the crew inside. They could eat metal and grow stronger from every bite. Jake watched from the bridge as both fleets tore into each other with everything they had. The Zephyrians fought with cold precision, their weapons striking exactly where they would do the most damage. The Corathans fought with wild fury, their ships twisting and changing shape to avoid enemy fire. Within the first hour, dozens of ships on both sides were destroyed. The wrecks tumbled through space, trailing fire and debris. The Defender tried to help survivors, but every time they approached a damaged ship, weapons fire drove them away. The two fleets were too busy fighting to care about rescue operations. Dr. Brooks studied the sensor readings from his medical station. Something was wrong with the energy patterns around the Nexus Gate. The massive amounts of weapons fire were creating dangerous resonance waves. The wormhole itself was starting to shake like a building in an earthquake. He had studied wormhole physics during his training. These structures were delicate things, held together by careful balances of gravity and energy. Too much disruption could cause them to collapse. And if a wormhole the size of the Nexus Gate collapsed, the results would be catastrophic. Brooks ran the calculations 3 times to make sure he was right. If the fighting continued at this level, the wormhole would implode within 6 hours. The implosion would create a black hole that would destroy everything within 3 light years. That included not just the two fleets, but also several inhabited star systems with billions of innocent people. Jake immediately tried to contact both fleet commanders. Amy sent the message on all frequencies using both Zephyrian and Corathan languages. She explained the danger as clearly as possible, showing them the same calculations that Brooks had done. The response was not what they had hoped for. Admiral Korthak of the Zephyrian fleet was the first to reply. His image appeared on the main screen, his crystalline features sharp and cold. He spoke in perfect emotionless tones as he dismissed the human warning. Humans were barely evolved apes, he said. They did not understand advanced physics well enough to make such predictions. The Corathan response came as a flood of images and emotions rather than words. Their hive mind leader, Nexus Prime, sent feelings of contempt and disgust. The humans were insignificant parasites trying to trick both sides into retreating. Their science was primitive compared to species that had been exploring space for thousands of years. Neither side would listen. Both fleets were convinced that the humans were either lying or too stupid to understand what they were talking about. The battle continued with even greater intensity. Ships on both sides poured more and more energy into their weapons, making the situation around the wormhole even worse. Lisa Adams worked frantically at her engineering station. She was trying to understand why the human sensors could detect the quantum fluctuations, while the alien sensors could not. The Defender was equipped with scientific instruments designed to study strange phenomena, not military-grade sensors built for targeting and defense. She realized that the answer lay in the difference between their purposes. Military sensors were designed to find specific things like enemy ships, weapon signatures, and shield frequencies. Scientific sensors were built to detect anything unusual, no matter how small or strange it might be. The quantum fluctuations that were tearing the wormhole apart were too subtle for military equipment to notice. They were hidden beneath all the noise of battle, but the Defender's sensors were specifically tuned to find exactly this kind of hidden signal. They could see the growing catastrophe that both advanced civilizations were blind to. Amy tried again to contact the fleets, this time sending detailed sensor data along with the warnings. She hoped that if they could see the evidence for themselves, they might start to believe the danger was real. Instead, both sides accused the humans of trying to deceive them with fake data. The Zephyrians claimed that their crystal-based computers were incapable of being fooled by primitive human tricks. The Corathans insisted that their biominds could sense any deception through psychic contact. Both species were so sure of their own superiority that they could not imagine humans knowing something they did not. Time was running out. Brooks updated his calculations as the battle grew worse. The cascade failure was accelerating. Instead of 6 hours, they might have only 4 before the wormhole collapsed. Millions of lives hung in the balance, and nobody would listen to the people trying to save them. Jake called his senior staff together for an emergency meeting. They gathered in the small conference room next to the bridge. Outside the windows, the battle raged on. Energy beams and bioweapons filled the space between the two fleets like a deadly light show. Brooks explained the situation once more. The quantum cascade was building toward critical levels. When it reached the breaking point, the wormhole would implode and take half the sector with it. They had tried warnings and evidence, but neither side would believe them. Adams suggested they try to disable the weapons on both fleets, but that was impossible. Even if they could somehow get close enough, the Defender's limited weapons could not damage ships designed to survive battles with each other. They might as well try to stop a hurricane with a paper fan. Carter proposed broadcasting on all frequencies at maximum power, hoping to jam the communication systems of both fleets. But that would only make them angrier and more likely to shoot first and ask questions later. The Defender would be destroyed before they could explain what they were trying to do. Jake stared out at the battle and tried to think of something, anything that might work. The human ship was outgunned, outnumbered, and completely ignored by both sides. They had no allies, no advanced technology, and no experience with this kind of situation. All they had was the knowledge that disaster was coming, and the determination to prevent it. Then Brooks said something that changed everything. He had been studying the biological and psychological profiles of both alien species. The Zephyrians had evolved on crystal worlds where everything followed mathematical patterns. The Corathans came from bioworlds where life grew in predictable cycles. Both species had developed in environments where everything made sense. Neither species had ever encountered true chaos. Their worlds were orderly places where cause and effect followed logical rules. Even their wars were fought according to established patterns and strategies. They could not understand randomness because they had never experienced it. But humans were different. Earth was a chaotic world where volcanoes erupted without warning, where weather changed without reason, where evolution took unexpected turns. Humans had learned to think in ways that no other species could understand. They were experts at dealing with the impossible. Jake felt something click in his mind. They could not outfight the alien fleets, and they could not convince them to stop. But maybe they could confuse them. Maybe they could introduce just enough chaos into the situation to disrupt the battle without actually harming anyone. It was a crazy idea. But crazy ideas were exactly what humans were good at. The crew of the Defender worked like they had never worked before. Every person on the ship understood that they had perhaps 3 hours to prevent the biggest disaster in galactic history. The battle outside grew more intense by the minute, and the quantum cascade continued building toward the point of no return. Amy Carter sat at her communication station, surrounded by equipment that looked like it belonged in a museum. Her grandfather had been a radio operator during the old wars on Earth, and he had taught her to appreciate vintage technology. She kept his original radio gear alongside the modern alien equipment. The alien communication systems worked on quantum frequencies that were supposed to be impossible to break. The Zephyrians used crystal matrix encryption that could process millions of calculations per second. The Corathans used bio-neural networks that changed their patterns faster than any computer could follow. But Amy's grandfather's radio worked on simple electromagnetic waves, the same kind that had been used for centuries. When she connected it to the alien system, something unexpected happened. The old Earth technology created interference patterns that the quantum systems could not predict or filter out. Dr. Brooks was studying everything they knew about Zephyrian and Corathan biology. He had access to thousands of research papers and medical scans. Most scientists focused on how these species were different from humans, but Brooks was looking for something else. He wanted to understand how they thought. The Zephyrians had evolved on worlds where crystals grew in perfect mathematical patterns. Their entire civilization was based on order, logic, and predictable sequences. Even their art followed strict geometric rules. Their minds worked like living computers, processing information in orderly steps. The Corathans came from bioworlds where everything grew according to genetic programming. Their evolution had followed predictable cycles for millions of years. Spring always followed winter. Prey animals always behaved in expected ways. Their hive minds thought in patterns that repeated like clockwork. Both species had one thing in common. They had never experienced true randomness. Their worlds were stable, predictable places where chaos was rare. When they encountered something that did not follow logical patterns, their minds had trouble processing it. They could not understand true unpredictability. Humans were completely different. Earth was a chaotic world where nothing stayed the same for long. Ice ages came and went. Continents drifted. Asteroids struck without warning. Species appeared and disappeared in the blink of geological time. Humans had evolved to expect the unexpected. Jake began to see the shape of a plan. The aliens thought in patterns and logical progressions. Their weapons, their tactics, their strategies all followed rules that could be predicted and countered. But what if those rules suddenly stopped making sense? What if they faced something that did not follow any pattern at all? Lisa Adams was studying the technical specifications of both fleets. The Zephyrian ships used quantum processors that calculated firing solutions with perfect accuracy. The Corathan bioships used neural networks that adapted to enemy movements in real time. Both systems were designed to handle predictable inputs. But what would happen if those systems encountered inputs that made no sense? Lisa had worked with computers her entire career, and she knew that even the most advanced systems could be confused by truly random data. If they could inject enough chaos into the alien networks, they might be able to disrupt the battle without causing permanent damage. The plan that emerged was audacious and completely insane. They would use their cobbled-together mix of human and alien technology to inject pure randomness into both fleets' command systems, not to destroy them but to confuse them, to make their perfect logic work against itself. Amy's vintage radio equipment would generate interference patterns that the quantum communication systems could not filter out. Brooks would provide psychological profiles to help them target the aliens' mental blind spots. Lisa would coordinate the technical aspects to make sure they hit the right systems at the right time. The Defender began moving closer to the center of the battle. Jake had to navigate carefully between the two fleets, avoiding weapons fire while getting close enough for their plan to work. The ship shook every time a stray energy beam passed nearby. The crew held their breath as bioweapons drifted past their hull. Brooks monitored the quantum cascade levels. They were approaching critical faster than he had predicted. The massive energy discharges from the battle were feeding back into the wormhole structure. They had perhaps 90 minutes before the point of no return. Lisa finished preparing their makeshift chaos generator. She had connected Amy's grandfather's radio to the ship's main communication array, then linked that to their scientific sensors and quantum analysis computers. The result was a device that could broadcast pure randomness across multiple frequencies at once. Amy ran final tests on the interference patterns. Each signal was carefully crafted to exploit specific weaknesses in alien psychology. Random music that would confuse mathematical minds. Unpredictable images that would overload pattern recognition systems. chaotic data streams that would make logical processors stumble. The Defender reached the optimal position between the two fleets. They were close enough to affect both sides equally, but far enough away to avoid being caught in their own interference field. Jake looked around the bridge at his crew. They were about to attempt something that had never been tried before. Outside the ship, the battle continued with devastating fury. Zephyrian crystal ships fired beams of coherent energy that could slice through solid rock. Karathan bioships launched swarms of living missiles that hunted their targets like predators. Both sides were fighting with everything they had. Jake opened a ship-wide communication channel. Every member of the crew could hear his voice as he spoke. He told them that they were about to attempt the impossible. They could not outfight the alien fleets, and they could not out-tech them. But they could outthink them. For thousands of years, warfare had been about who had the biggest weapons or the most advanced technology. But today, they would show the galaxy what it meant to be human. They would prove that sometimes the most powerful weapon was not a gun or a bomb, but an idea that nobody else could understand. Brooks announced that the quantum cascade had reached 80% of critical levels. The wormhole was beginning to show visible signs of instability. Space around the Nexus Gate was starting to ripple like water. They had perhaps an hour before the collapse became inevitable. Amy placed her hand on her grandfather's radio. The old man had used this same equipment to help win battles against impossible odds. He had taught her that sometimes the simplest solutions were the most effective. Complex problems did not always need complex answers. Lisa completed the final system checks. All their jury-rigged equipment was working perfectly. The chaos generator was ready to broadcast randomness on a scale that the galaxy had never seen. They were about to introduce pure human unpredictability into the most advanced military systems ever built. Jake took a deep breath and gave the order. Amy activated the chaos generator, and suddenly the Defender was broadcasting on every frequency at once. To the aliens, it would look like random noise from a primitive ship. They had no idea that they were about to encounter something their advanced minds could not process. The signals spread out from the Defender like ripples in a pond. Random radio waves mixed with quantum interference patterns. Chaotic data streams collided with perfectly ordered alien communication networks. For the first time in galactic history, pure human unpredictability was about to meet alien logic. The effect of the chaos generator was not immediate. For the first few minutes, both alien fleets continued fighting as if nothing had changed. Their weapons still fired with deadly precision. Their ships still moved in perfect formation. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to go wrong. The Zephyrian crystal ships were the first to show signs of confusion. Their quantum computers, which normally processed information in orderly mathematical sequences, began encountering data that made no sense. Random signals from the Defender were mixing with their targeting calculations, creating equations that had no solution. A Zephyrian cruiser fired at what its computers said was a Karathan destroyer. The energy beam shot wide, missing by several kilometers. The crystal mind tried to recalculate, but the interference patterns kept changing the numbers. It was like trying to solve a math problem where the answer kept changing while you worked on it. Another Zephyrian ship attempted to coordinate with its allies, but the communication channels were filled with Amy's carefully crafted chaos. The crystal networks tried to filter out the noise, but every time they adapted to one pattern, a new random signal appeared. Their perfect logic was being twisted into knots. The Karathan bioships were having their own problems. Their living computers were designed to adapt and evolve in response to threats. When they encountered the random signals from the Defender, they tried to develop countermeasures. But each adaptation spawned new adaptations, creating an endless cycle of confusion. A Karathan biocruiser launched a swarm of hunting missiles at a Zephyrian target. But the missile's bio-neural guidance systems encountered the chaotic interference and began adapting to threats that did not exist. They started changing course randomly, chasing phantom enemies and attacking empty space. Amy watched the results on her monitors with growing excitement. The alien communication networks were starting to break down. Ships that should have been working together were operating independently. Formation flying became ragged as pilots struggled with navigation systems that gave contradictory readings. Lisa monitored the technical aspects of their attack. The chaos generator was working better than she had hoped. The random signals were penetrating deep into the alien computer networks, causing cascade failures throughout their systems, but they were not destroying anything permanently. They were just making everything unpredictable. Both fleets began firing erratically. Weapons that should have hit their targets missed by large margins. Ships that should have been destroyed sailed through waves of enemy fire unharmed. The carefully choreographed battle was turning into a confused mess of random shots and missed opportunities. Dr. Brooks checked the quantum cascade readings. The reduced energy output was having an effect. The wormhole was still unstable, but the rate of decay was slowing. If they could reduce the weapons fire even more, they might be able to prevent the collapse entirely. But the chaos generator alone would not be enough. The aliens were already starting to adapt to the interference. Zephyrian computers were beginning to filter out some of the random signals. Korathan biominds were learning to ignore the phantom threats. They needed something more powerful to completely disrupt the battle. Jake made a decision that surprised even his own crew. He ordered Amy to begin broadcasting Earth's entire cultural database. Music, art, literature, history, philosophy, entertainment, and everything else that made humans unique. If pure randomness could confuse the aliens, then pure human creativity might overwhelm them completely. Amy began with music. She started broadcasting everything from classical symphonies to rock and roll, from folk songs to electronic dance music. The mathematical minds of the Zephyrians tried to analyze the patterns and found chaos instead of order. There were rhythms that made no logical sense, harmonies that broke every rule of their crystal-based mathematics. Jazz music was particularly effective. The improvised solos and unexpected chord changes caused Zephyrian targeting computers to freeze up completely. They could not predict what note would come next, so they could not calculate firing solutions. Ships that had been deadly accurate moments before began missing every shot. Next came human art. Paintings and sculptures that celebrated randomness and asymmetry flooded the Korathan bio-networks. The hive minds tried to find evolutionary patterns in abstract expressionism and found nothing but beautiful chaos. Their pattern recognition systems crashed one by one. Human literature followed, with stories that took unexpected turns and characters who made illogical decisions. Poetry that rhymed randomly or not at all. Novels where the heroes failed and the villains won. Comedy that made fun of everything, including itself. The alien minds tried to understand the meaning and found contradiction at every turn, but it was human warfare that truly paralyzed the alien fleets. Military histories filled with battles won by luck rather than planning. Strategies that succeeded by breaking their own rules. Soldiers who disobeyed orders and saved the day. Generals who made terrible mistakes and somehow turned them into victories. The Zephyrian computers tried to process human military tactics and found systems that made no mathematical sense. How could an army win by retreating? How could a smaller force defeat a larger one by dividing itself? How could random decisions lead to organized victory? The Korathan biominds were equally confused by human emotions in warfare. They could not understand how fear could make soldiers braver, how anger could make them calmer, how desperation could lead to careful planning. Human psychology was an endless maze of contradictions that their logical minds could not navigate. The effect on both fleets was dramatic. Ships began turning in circles as their navigation systems struggled with the input overload. Weapons fired randomly at empty space as targeting computers tried to process human chess games and cooking recipes. Communication networks collapsed under the weight of human poetry and song lyrics. Admiral Korthak of the Zephyrian fleet appeared on the Defender's communication screen. His crystalline features showed something that neither Jake nor his crew had ever seen before. Confusion. The perfect mathematical mind was struggling to understand what was happening to his fleet. The Admiral demanded to know what the humans were doing to his ships. His weapons were misfiring, his computers were calculating impossible answers, and his crew was reporting hallucinations of something called rock and roll music. Jake simply told him that they were sharing human culture. The Korathan response was even more confused. Their hive mind sent chaotic images and emotions, a mixture of fascination and terror. They had encountered something completely outside their experience. Their bioships were adapting to stimuli that made no evolutionary sense. Dr. Brooks checked the quantum readings again. The cascade was stabilizing rapidly. With both fleets firing sporadically and ineffectively, the energy output had dropped below dangerous levels. The wormhole was no longer in immediate danger of collapse, but something else was happening. The random weapons fire from both fleets was becoming less random. Instead of shooting at each other, ships were firing into empty space or missing their targets by increasingly large margins. It was as if they were trying not to hit anything. Amy realized what was happening first. The alien minds were not just confused by human culture. They were learning from it. The Zephyrians were discovering that mathematics could be used for art as well as war. The Korathans were finding that evolution could be creative as well as efficient. For the first time in their species' history, both sides were experiencing doubt. Not about their cause or their abilities, but about the very nature of conflict itself. Human culture was showing them that there were other ways to think, other ways to solve problems, other ways to exist. The battle was ending not with victory or defeat, but with something unprecedented in galactic history. Both fleets were stopping to think. They were questioning their assumptions, examining their beliefs, and wondering if there might be alternatives to war that they had never considered. The silence was strange. For the first time in hours, the space around the Nexus Gate was quiet. Both fleets drifted like sleeping giants, their weapons powered down and their engines barely humming. The cascade of human culture had done what no force in the galaxy could accomplish. It had made the two most powerful civilizations in the galaxy stop and think. Dr. Brooks watched the quantum readings with growing relief. The energy levels around the wormhole were dropping steadily. The cascade effect was reversing itself as the weapons fire decreased. The Nexus Gate was stabilizing and the danger of collapse was fading away like a bad dream. But something more important was happening. Admiral Korthak of the Zephyrian fleet and Nexus Prime of the Korathan forces were both sending signals to the Defender. Not threats or demands, but questions. They wanted to understand what had just happened to their ships, their crews, and their minds. Jake stood on the bridge and realized that he was about to participate in the most important conversation in galactic history. Two species that had been locked in deadly combat for 3 years were now asking a human ship to explain how they had been stopped without firing a single shot. The Admiral appeared, first on the communication screen. His crystalline features were still sharp and geometric, but there was something different in his eyes. For the first time in his long life, he looked uncertain. He spoke in his usual precise tones, but his words carried a weight they had never held before. He told Jake that his fleet's computers had been analyzing the human cultural data for several hours. They had found patterns that should not exist, mathematics that defied logic, and art that served no practical purpose yet somehow moved the minds that observed it. How was this possible? The Korathan response came as a flood of images and emotions. Nexus Prime's hive mind had been studying human evolution and found something that challenged everything they thought they knew. Humans had developed intelligence not through careful planning, but through random mutations and chaotic selection pressures. Jake tried to explain what made humans different. They came from a world where nothing stayed the same for long. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, and continental drift had shaped their evolution. They had learned to expect change, to adapt to the unexpected, to find opportunity in disaster. The Zephyrians and Korathans had both evolved on stable worlds where change was slow and predictable. Their minds were designed to find patterns and follow them. They were incredibly good at understanding complex systems, but they struggled when those systems behaved randomly. Admiral Korthak asked the question that would change everything. If humans were so good at dealing with chaos and unpredictability, why had they not conquered the galaxy? They had been in space for 100 years, long enough to build massive fleets and claim dozens of worlds. Jake's answer surprised even his own crew. Humans were not interested in conquest. They were explorers, scientists, artists, and dreamers. They wanted to understand the universe, not control it. They saw other species as potential friends and teachers, not enemies to be defeated. This concept was difficult for both alien species to understand. The Zephyrians had always sought to impose order on the galaxy through superior technology and mathematical perfection. The Korathans had tried to spread their biological patterns through controlled evolution and systematic expansion. But humans approached the galaxy differently. They wanted to learn from everyone they met. They collected art, music, stories, and ideas from dozens of different worlds. They saw diversity as strength rather than weakness. They believed that the galaxy was more interesting when it contained many different ways of thinking. Dr. Brooks contributed to the conversation, by explaining the medical readings they had taken during the battle. Both alien species had shown signs of stress that went beyond normal combat fatigue. They were suffering from something that humans called existential anxiety. They were questioning the very foundations of their beliefs. Amy shared some of the responses they had recorded from both fleets. Zephyrian pilots were asking their computers about the meaning of beauty. Corathan biominds were wondering why humans created art that served no survival function. Both species were experiencing something they had never felt before: curiosity about ideas that had no practical application. Lisa explained the technical aspects of what they had done. They had not attacked the alien systems with viruses or logic bombs. Instead, they had introduced new ways of thinking that the alien computers could not ignore. They had expanded the possibilities rather than limiting them. The revelation led to something unprecedented in galactic history. Instead of demanding surrender or negotiating terms of defeat, both fleet commanders asked for a three-way conference. They wanted to understand not just how the humans had stopped the battle, but why they had bothered to try. The meeting took place aboard the Defender in the ship's small conference room. It was the first time in galactic history that representatives of all three species had sat down together as equals. Admiral Korthak appeared as a hologram, his crystal form gleaming in the ship's lights. Nexus Prime manifested as a shifting pattern of images and emotions. Jake proposed something that neither alien species had considered. The war between the Zephyrians and Corathans had lasted 3 years because both sides were too similar. They were both ancient, powerful, and convinced of their own superiority. What they needed was a mediator who thought differently. Humans could serve as neutral arbitrators in conflicts between logical species. They could provide the random element that would break deadlocks and suggest solutions that neither side would think of on their own. They could be the chaos factor that prevented the galaxy from stagnating in endless repetitive conflicts. The negotiations took 6 months. During that time, representatives from all three species worked together to create a new kind of galactic government. The Zephyrians provided logical structure and mathematical precision. The Corathans contributed biological wisdom and adaptive thinking. The humans added creativity, flexibility, and the ability to see problems from unexpected angles. The Galactic Accords were signed aboard the UES Defender on a day that would be remembered for thousands of years. The war ended not with victory or defeat, but with the creation of something entirely new. A government based on cooperation between different ways of thinking rather than domination by any single approach. Jake stood on the bridge of his ship and watched former enemies working together to rebuild. The Nexus Gate, Zephyrian crystal technology, provided the mathematical framework. Corathan bioengineering created adaptive systems that could evolve and improve over time. Human creativity found ways to combine both approaches into something neither species could have built alone. Chief Engineer Adams found herself teaching alien scientists about something she called chaos engineering. The idea that random elements could actually improve system performance was revolutionary to species that valued predictability above all else. But the proof was right in front of them. Dr. Brooks published research papers on multi-species psychology that became required reading in universities across the galaxy. His work on the therapeutic effects of controlled randomness helped countless individuals from species that had never experienced mental flexibility. Amy Carter became the galaxy's first professor of chaos communication. She taught confused alien students how to appreciate jazz music, abstract art, and poetry that did not rhyme. Her classes were always full, even though nobody could predict what she would teach from one day to the next. Humanity found its place in the galaxy not as conquerors or subjects, but as the bridge between different ways of thinking. Human ships became mobile embassies, traveling from system to help resolve conflicts that seemed impossible to solve. They specialized in finding third options when only two seemed to exist. Years later, historians would study the Battle of Nexus Gate and try to understand how such a small ship had ended such a large war. They would analyze the technical specifications and the tactical decisions, but they would miss the most important point. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the most advanced solution was the simplest one. When perfect logic met perfect pattern matching, you needed perfect chaos to break the deadlock. Humanity's greatest strength was not superior technology or overwhelming force. It was their beautiful, unpredictable, wonderfully human ability to think outside any box that anyone else had ever imagined. The UES Defender continued her mission of exploration, but now she carried representatives from a dozen different species. Her crew had grown to include Zephyrian mathematicians who were learning to appreciate abstract art, and Korathan bioengineers who were studying the evolution of human music. Together they searched for new ways to understand the infinite complexity of the universe, and somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, other conflicts waited for the touch of human chaos to show them that there was always another way to think about any problem. The galaxy had become a more interesting place, and that was exactly what humans had always wanted it to be.